Today, let's recap what we covered yesterday. So mainly we look around indicators of compromise, try understand how those indicators could be different from an IT system versus an OT system perspective. Why the traditional IDS or detection system might not be enough for cyber physical systems. We also talk about something called indicators of attack. Right? We look into IEC 61850 that is there to kind of help understand the monitoring system and security about the power substation. And we also look into one of the work that we did, developed a simulator where we were able to mount attack, and we were able to derive certain indicators to reflect, to detect some of the attack instances, and so on. Okay, so today what we're going to do is we will look at another work that we did. So in one of the tutorial yesterday, we talked about Ukraine power grid. Yeah. If I just recap what happened is the attackers have gained access to the power system, power substation through control center. So what they did is they targeted one of the operators at the control center. Considering that these are the electrical engineers, they don't have enough understanding about the cybersecurity. So the attacker, they send a spear phishing email to one of the operators, and this person intentionally or unintentionally clicked on the link. Now the email was having an attached Excel file, right? So generally, your IDS, the way we design it, the way we rule it, we mostly look for if there are any exe or any malware is there. But generally, we consider MS Word, Excel, like these are kind of more trusted software. Now, there are property in Word document and Excel document. They have something called macro. Right? So macro, where there you can, write a small instructions, and whatever you want this to happen, when you open the document, it will execute it. So there was macros enabled, and when this person clicked on the Excel document, try open it, there was a Trojan horse attached to that macro, gets into the system, and created a backdoor entry for attacker. Then attacker went to the system, changed the password, and logged him off. So the person who was sitting at that device, they were not able to, he was not able to log in because the password was changed. Now then the attacker, once he or she got access to the device, they look into something called domain controllers, right? So that their next thing is to understand, can they access other devices? Can they access other infrastructure? Now, as we said, some of the infrastructure doesn't have security, so you might, once you are in part of the system, you can access those directly. Some parts may be having some little access. In most of the cases, they do use something called VPN, right, in order to protect kind of sending encrypted environment. But then you can always look into endpoint security of VPN. VPN is from this device to this about. But what about if someone hacked this device and inject the data? So yeah, sending the malicious data. But anyway, they were having access to VPN credentials, keys to have access, or password have access to the devices, and so on. So they compromised large number of devices. What they did is they updated the software of those devices. We call it firmware here. So they upgraded the firmware. The reason, so the other operators, when they tried to send the command to control the system, it was not working because the software has changed. These commands were not working. But then attackers, since they updated the software, they know what command they need to run. They open circuit breakers, detached generator, transformers, and so on. And they heavily damaged 30 substations and 2 power distribution centers. They also launched telephone denial of service. So they cut down communication lines so you can't report anybody. And this is something happening in real. Yeah. So utility has no idea what's going on. Company has no idea what's going on. And it takes around 10 to 15 minutes to do all those things. Now, before they completed their attack, they also run something called kill disk. So kill disk is one of the software. If you run, it will wipe out all your memory, all the storage, right? So if you have intention to look into the forensic, digital forensics, say try understand what happened once the attack is done. There are no footprints, so you won't be able to trace it, what happened actually. Right. So the malware was Black Energy. We talked about that yesterday a bit. That extracts the list of proxy servers in the network. And if you can bypass the proxy, you can get into the system. Right? So we look around this, what to do. So the very first thing that we did is, okay, there's one tool called OLE dump. This is object linking and embedding tool. So generally, if in order to understand whether a macro is enabled in a document, you need to open and check it. But if you open it, there's a high risk if there's any Trojan horse or virus attached to it. So this tool, OLE dump, will help you to understand whether a document contains a macro. If yes, is it enabled or not, without opening it. Yeah, so these kind of tools can help us understand, is it safe to open or not. Then we also kind of look into event logs and host-based monitoring. So we created a tool that can help us understand and detect centralized timeline analysis. So we look into log file access, who is accessing what files, registry data, internal history files. We also created logs for communication network. For example, what time you are stopping and starting a particular activity, acknowledgement status, are there any open connections? Because sometimes attackers also perform some kind of DOS attack where their intention is not to complete the handshake, right? So attacker might send a request and you send a response and expecting an acknowledgement to complete it, but the attacker doesn't, never send it back. So you have an open connection. You are still, the server is still waiting those acknowledgement to be received, but they never came. Then we also look at some other parameter I'll be talking about in next slides. We also collected some data around attempts of wrong password or change settings of the device. Somebody is attempting to log in, but they are unsuccessful attempts. We would like to know who are those users, how many attempts they are making, and looking around what are the temporal anomalies. Now, sometimes when you collect all this data, it could be because there are fault in the system, there are misconfiguration in the system, there are maintenance going on in the system, there are routine commands that we are sending, or it could be an attack, right? So it's not like when you collect all the data, everything is about malicious. You need to apply some other logic to understand, what happened at this point of time. If you are able to trace it, so that seems it is something legitimate. If not, could be malicious thing. Then we also look at network forensic side and kind of think about how can we improve IDS system. So there's open source called Suricata is one of the intrusion detection system. We try extend that. We use DNP3 protocol, and using Wireshark we were mounting a tag, and then through Wireshark you can monitor and understand what's going on. Then we also look at blocking certain things, so that even your operators are not enough trained, you can still protect their environment in some way, right? So what we did is we blocked the malicious URLs. So generally, there are repositories nowadays. Yeah. So if you wanted to know what are the malicious links so that I don't click them, yeah, Yeah, they are public repository that you can, people are just, whenever they come across with any malicious link objects, they put it there, and then it created kind of a database for us. So we block the malicious URL and masks. We also look into botnet CNC URLs. So as I said, malware gets into the system, and their intention is to send the data out of the network through the control and command server. Yeah, so they send it your organizational data to somewhere else, to an external server. And then, of course, looking at more typical IT indicators like IP address and port numbers and so on. We also block some of the malicious object by looking at their hash code. Yeah, so that's very kind of standard practice. Whenever there's a malicious file object, if you're not sure, generally people compute their hash. And then based on the hash, again, we have repositories of those kind of malicious object that can help us understand what is, because these all are about the strings. What is a virus? It's just a string. It's a code. Yeah. So if we pass this to, if I'm passing the exact code to a hash function, it will give me a unique code. So every time, if I have that code, every time when I come across with a virus, I'll pass that to a function. If I get the same code from one of those which I have in my database, I can easily get to know this is this type of virus or malware or whatever. So they are also kind of database and repository. You can also block this. And there's also something called OWASP. What is OWASP? Have you heard about it? Huh? Google it. What is that? What is the full form of OWASP? If we get time, we can talk about tomorrow more in detail. But then at least you should know what is OWASP. What is that? It's OWASP. Sorry? Right. So these are kind of, it's been started, I guess, a couple of years back. And their idea is to think about some kind of standard. Yeah? So they have done a lot of work around IoT practices. What could be the potential cause and cybersecurity for IoT devices? How do we understand IoT architecture? What are different layers and each layer? What could be cybersecurity issues? And then giving some kind of possible recommendations. Right. So you also can do file hash and other things. So as we said, the attackers did use a malware called Black Energy. Black Energy is a Trojan horse that is used to conduct DDoS attack, cyber espionage, and information destructions attack. Kaspersky Lab. So Kaspersky is one of the famous lab in the world. They do a lot of work around cybersecurity. Yeah, they do have their own antivirus, intrusion detection, and other things, but they are very active in research and development. So they look around what happened, and they come across over there. These are the potential variant of Black Energy. Those were used in that particular instance. Yeah, so they run Windows 32, Windows 64, and so on. Now we also look into, okay, so one thing is how do you, when you are thinking about a solution, the very first thing you need to understand the problem. If you are understanding problem in more detail, you can derive an understanding what kind of solution will work, what kind of solution will not work. Right? For example, if there's a need to protect your data, some kind of confidentiality is needed, we know maybe encryption will work. Now the question is what kind of encryption, and there are a number of encryption algorithms available. Now the question is which of these algorithms will work in that environment, in those conditions. What are those devices? If you are encrypting data on servers, might be there are not much constraints. If you are encrypting data on devices like IoT devices, those devices can't handle a lot of computations. Yeah, and so on and so forth. Sometimes when you're encrypting, data is sensitive, require privacy preservation, and so on and so forth. So we need to build that understanding that out of these, which one will work based on what kind of requirements we have. So we know that we need to apply encryption, but it's not just the encryption. On what system you're applying, how long you need to apply, and what kind of computation you need. Does it support that computation? Do you need storage? Yeah. Whatever computation you are making, do you need temporary storage? If yes, then do those devices have enough storage, and so on. So we collect that requirement of the environment that we are in, and then we decide maybe AES, RSA will not work, and we need to talk about some more lightweight cryptography and so on. Right? So you understand the problem, you understand the environment, so that you get a sense that in this environment we need this kind of, there are restrictions, there are certain conditions, and keeping that in mind, we need to design our solutions. Right? And as a researcher, your aim is to develop a product, a tool, or software, or algorithm, or method, specific to a scenario, specific to an attack. There's no need to say, claim that I have developed an algorithm that will, that can prevent all kind of attacks, or this will work in all kind of condition. It doesn't like that. If you're doing so, you are over-claiming things. Yeah? These are false claims. And if you're submitting, for example, your publications to top venues, people will immediately reject it. Because there's nobody that can come up with those kind of things, where you develop something and then can fit all. It will never happen, right? So we need to understand the problem in that environment, understand what kind of restrictions, conditions we have, and then develop a solution that work in that environment. As long as it's working perfectly, absolutely fine. Right. Now the next thing, when you think about solution, we also need to understand what kind of attack I'm talking about. Right? When we do research, we are not expecting that you consider all kind of attacks and develop a solution and do things, right? Our aim is maybe pick one type of attack, two type of attack, depending upon how much time you have for experiments and so on. But then picking again specific kind of environment in terms of threat model would be good enough. So before we first of all, we understand the problem, we understand the environment, we understand the system model. System model means my problem fits into a scenario between, for example, control center and substation. Yeah, in a transmission system. Or my problem fits into between smart meter and control center. So that's a different scenario. My problem might fits into within the substation between different devices, yeah, and so on. So you need to define your system model as well. You can't just say I have developed something that will apply in smart grid or power grid. The system is too broad. We have to be very specific within the scenario that this tool, this solution will work in this scenario. That might work in other scenario as well that you can test if you like. But then when you're designing, you are defining your boundaries as well. Which part of the system I'm talking about, and this is the problem in this environment. Now I'm developing a solution that will solve this problem in this environment for this system or this part of the system. So you define what kind of attack you are considering. Yeah, so we call, for example, system susceptibility, where we kind of assume sometimes. If you're only looking at solution, then you can assume saying the attacker, we assume attacker will modify X, Y, Z, and then we wanted to know if there's a tool or there's a method that we can come up with that can detect those and so on. So say adversary can perform suspicious and malicious activity, including attempt to access login credentials of the operator and or device, transmission of fake bad commands such as opening a circuit breaker connected to a substation device, and disturbing network communication and packet data. So that's what we assume based on this scenario, what happened with Ukraine power attack. Yeah. So we thought like attacker can do this, because they have default passwords and they have black energy and they can get into the system and so on. I mean, earlier we talked about we have IDS in place, we have a couple of other solutions. Those solutions might be able to detect malware. If they detect it, excellent. What if that doesn't work? And then attackers are really smart. If they have an attack a system with one variant, they are not going to repeat it. They will come up with something very different. Yeah. So they assume might be now you are aware, you have some kind of solution that can stop it. So they come up with a new kind of variant of attack or very different malware. Then we talk about attackers' capability, right? Again, these are very important aspects to consider, because if you are saying attacker doesn't know anything and you are developing a solution, which is okay, but then practically it might be possible that attacker also have some information. If the attacker has additional information, might be your solution is kind of little bit weaker than you thought, because your assumption is attacker doesn't know anything about the system. Yeah, apart from whatever he or she is getting over the network or. So we need to be realistic when you design attacker's capability. What will work practically? What kind of information they might have? So you think about different scenario. For example, if this is an external attacker, might not have information, but generally when you Google it, you collect some, read some papers and write, so you get some sense. What devices they might have, which are, as I said, for these kind of systems, they are very specific vendors. There are 3 or 4 companies. Those develop those kind of devices, and so it's not a kind of very wide world to understand. So might be you go to their website, you got to see what those devices, what their specifications are, what protocol they run. Yeah, you get an understanding whether, and then you Google it, whether this protocol has, what kind of security it does have, what are the vulnerabilities, and so on. So it gives you a kind of a hint what are the possible ways to attacking a system, for example, right? So in this case, we said, and the more complex example would be insider threat. Someone within the organization who has enough knowledge how to attack the system, can share system with the attacker, and then they can attack. So depending on capability, you say adversary capability. So in this case, we assume that adversary is capable of performing man-in-the-middle attack by altering or replacing a legitimate command, injecting a malicious command, or accessing the control center to send a legitimate command as an insider attack. Right? So you need to define capability of the attacker. Who are those people? Where they work? What the environment? What information they have? And that environment will decide attacker's capability. And then you need to think about what should be the solution. Someone who have access to this lab. So let's say I need to protect my laptop. If there are people who don't have access to this lab, I can put a lock, and I'm good enough. Yeah, my solution is put a lock, good lock. Maybe adults or people with age X can access it. But what if people who have access to this lab become adversary? So the lock will not only the solution, it will not work in my case. I need something else to protect it, right? So it's extremely important to understand attacker's capability. What is the environment you have considered for the attack? It's not just the type of attack, but the environment, capabilities, really important. And when we say attacker's accessibility, we assume that adversary has knowledge of the communication network topology, what are the devices I might have, and the way they are connected in the network. As well as power system topology, the adversary also has enough resource to perform the required malicious suspicious actions and has accessibility to the system. So we are assuming that a lot of accessibility information attacker might have. And then you need to think about what you want to develop that will help us, help this scenario. So we derive certain use cases, what attacker target, and how you're going to, what will be the impact on the system, and possibly what action or steps we need to follow. So the use case 1, it says the adversaries impersonate the network and sends a false but unwanted command, legitimate command outside of the control center to breaker of the largest generator. Now, what is impersonation? What does it mean when I say adversary impersonate the network? You're pretending to be a legitimate. Someone, for example, if you are saying somebody is impersonating director of a company, means you are pretending to be that person. In a way, you are created a fabricated ID in a digital world, and then you are claiming that you are that person, but you are not actually that person, but some way you have created a fake ID that can work. So, in this particular scenario where we are assuming the adversary impersonate the network, gets into the system without detecting, or your device or your ID assumes or understand that this is a legitimate person. Yeah. So, the attacker sends a false command, is a legitimate command, because if it is something unusual command, it will be detected, which is not a part of this routine command. So, what attacker did, get into the system and then sending a legitimate command to control something. To, in this case, we are opening a circuit breaker of a generator, which is not a routine command. You know, we only do this thing when it's required. When the system seems to be unstable, lines are overloaded, then we make certain actions to balance the system. But in this case, the intention of attacker is to destabilize system, right? Now, we understand what will be the effect of the communication network. So, we have communication network, we have power system network. Under this attack, we can observe and monitor several effects on communication systems, such as, we believe we have some kind of IDS in place. Intrusion detection system notifies the control operator what command it receives. Operator verifies whether the command is legitimate. And second, the false command was issued to substation RTU connected to the breaker of the largest generator. So, we assume there is an IDS in place that can help us. Now, it's again depend what is IDS, just a software, simple software, and it works based on the rule that you are putting. If it doesn't have any rule, it won't do anything, right? So, we generally put a rule, what to block, what to allow, and so on and so forth. So, in this way, we are assuming that whenever it receives a command, RTU, notify the notify RTU, saying there's a command which are trying to open something, close something. Yeah. Can you look into this before we execute it? Attacks on the power system. If this attack is successful, we can observe the following impact on the power system. One, insecure operation of the power system. Second, possible shedding of electrical load. If you open something, that means you are disconnecting the system. If there's a demand in a region, if you're disconnecting, you're not supplying it, lines will be overloaded. Right? If lines are overloaded, you're not taking any actions, your components might be damaged, the system might be disconnected or maybe go down. So, we thought in a more detail what are these steps. So, one, attacker targets command mentioned in the threat model. So, we talked about threat model in the previous slide. IDS detects a suspicious malicious command based on its rule engine. Again, default rules, we can put some default rules saying block those kind of IP seems to be suspicious, you can block port number and so on. But in this that's not the case, because we assume that attacker sends a legitimate command. But the command was sent from outside of the control center to open something. But you're sending outside of, possibly IDS can detect your IP address and so on and so forth, right? Get a sense that this command was sent by someone who is not part of the network or sent from an external network. And notifies the operator. Operator verifies the control command did not issue this command, right? Now we developed a software, a simulation environment called CPSA, Cyber Physical Situational Awareness. I'll be talking about that in next few slides. CPSA performs power flow. So as we say, once you got data, you pass. Someone trying to open something, close something, you want to run those algorithms to see how this will behave on the system, if you allow it. And cyber physical contingency analysis to evaluate the effect of command on the power system if it was allowed to go through. So what if you allow this command, what will happen to the system? So we wanted to, so we created an environment, simulation environment where we can test what will happen to this, and then you decide whether you should allow it or you should not allow it. As I said, even if there's a malicious command, even the data is modified, as long as your system is stable, we are okay. Yeah, we don't really care. Operator discards the command and secure system operation is restored, because since it's a malicious command, operator discards this command. Now, what is called contingency analysis? So saying CPSA performs power flow and cyber physical contingency analysis. What is contingency analysis? What does it do? So in this case, now we are start talking about cyber physical systems, but basically these are physical systems, right? If you take out the cyber component out of it, saying this is all the devices, there's no device which is connected to internet, right? Then it's a purely a physical system. Now within the physical system, your people wanted to know what will happen if component X failed, right? For whatever reason. There's a pipeline, there's a gas pipeline, what pipeline leaks? You need to replace it, you need to block it, whatever. Yeah. So from time to time, they perform this something called contingency analysis, which will help them to understand the impact if a certain component fails at any point of time. Yeah, so they do this kind of study where, let's say they have 10 components, they will say what if component 1 fails, how system will behave, what action you will take, what if component 2 fails, and so on and so forth up to all the components. Yeah, so this analysis is called contingency analysis. Now I'm just talking about one component, so we call it n-1 contingency analysis. You can think of what if any of 2 component fails out of whatever you have. So this is called n-2 contingency analysis, and so on and so forth. Yeah. What if kind of multiple component fails? How does it impact? And so people used to do this for physical systems. Now we wanted to understand how this behaves, how this will work in cyber physical systems. So you start thinking what there's a cyber attack that targets device X, disable something, modify data, send some malicious command and so on. So you want to perform that kind of contingency analysis to understand what will happen to the system. Now there is second scenario. We say adversary fabricates or modifies legitimate command sent to a generator breaker over the insecure network. So we are saying the command, let's assume if the command is not legitimate, it's been fabricated. Yeah? Someone is sending unusual command. So what will happen? IDS does not detect command modification, but still sends a notification to the operator. Operator verifies that the control did not send this command. CP asks IT personnel or security team, whatever we have, for attack information, with the response that there is suspicious of man-in-the-middle attack. And then you follow the same step as we did previously. In third scenario, so I got one more scenario, sorry. In third scenario, I'm assuming adversary has an insider attack. That could be another person than the operator. At the control center, sends a legitimate unwanted command to the generator breaker. In this case, we assume that command was sent from the control center. Yeah? Not the operator, someone else sent it because they're part of the network and some way they got access to it. The effect of On the communication network, the operator receives a command notification from IDS and finds the transmitted legitimate command was not issued by him. In worst case scenario, the operator ignores the notification and allows the execution of command of the power system. Assuming maybe this command was sent by some other operator. Since it was sent within the substation, might be someone else sent it. Yeah, so they wanted to understand what will happen if we allow it. So IDS, in this case, IDS does not detect insider attack, which is very difficult to detect, by the way, and notifies the operator that this is a legitimate command because it came from control center. Operator notifies that the received command is the same as what issued from the control center, so that seems to be legitimate. Generator breaker receives a false command and trips. So the command is to open a breaker, it will open and detach the generator. CPSA runs contingency analysis, discovers that the system is insecure. Now, not in all cases, but it all depends on how the topology look like, which generator you're opening. So in this case, we are opening breaker of the generator with largest capacity. Yeah? Indicating that command was legitimate but false. CPSA asks IT personnel for attack information with the response that there is suspicion of the insider attack. CPSA prompt operator to reclose the breaker. Right? So if you got to get a sense the system become unstable, then you need to take certain actions. So the software or the tool that we have developed will notify operators, close this or do this. Right? If the breaker does not respond after 20 seconds, CPSA prompt the operator to initiate appropriate remedies, and so on. So that's how we try understand, create certain scenarios, understanding variety of attackers' capability, seeing what will happen if attackers have different capabilities, sending different type of commands, whether it's legitimate or malicious and so on, and what will happen to the system. And then with keeping in mind all the environment, we decided to develop a co-simulator. We call it Cyber Physical Situational Awareness, which is CPSA. Now, the very first question is, what is the need of developing a new co-simulation? Right? Is it possible we could utilize the existing simulators? The answer is yes and no. In a sense, we have power system simulators, we have communication network simulator. What are communication network simulators? Have we worked on any of those? NS2, NS3, yeah, OpNet, the number of communication simulators, and then have the variety of power system simulator. However, we are not having any integrated simulator that can help us simulate the whole environment, including cybersecurity part of it. Even if you try it, some of the simulators are really complex to understand, they are hard to extend, or sometimes they don't really help you in terms of they have interoperability issues and so on. So we wanted to develop something that can be used by the operators sitting at control center. Right. So when you are developing a tool, you also need to think about the interoperability and compatibility with the existing system. If your existing system is, let's say, in Java, everything in Java, and you come up with some Fortran, some other language saying, I've developed a tool, you can integrate it. So integration becomes another problem. So we need to also think when you design and developing a product, should be able to integrate with the existing system, right? Not develop something too complex so that people don't able to understand. At the end, they will not use it if they don't really understand or taking too long for them. So our aim is to develop software, derive some information out of it, and present that information in a way that operators can understand. Right? If you're asking electrical operators to look into logs and do, run forensic, run Wireshark to detect XYZ, it's too much for them. But they are not trained with those kind of expertise. So you develop a tool that can do things for them, present the results in a way that can easy for them to understand what is happening and what they need to do in terms of taking actions. Right? right. So this is something called EMS environment. EMS is energy management system, where there's a number of operators there, part of EMS systems. And then we have power EMS server and communication. You got a system where you collect and communicate with through communication channels. Yeah. So you go power system metadata and communication network metadata. What is metadata? Okay. What could be example? Right. Yes. 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 Good. Okay. So within power system, let's say at each substation we have something called state estimator. Right. So we can call it distributed state estimator. Let's say. So when you are injecting data, collecting data, sending it to the SCADA, before collecting, we have some algorithm in place that can look into whether data that we collect looks okay or not. If not, sometimes data could be corrected by algorithm, right? But generally, they are at local level. They are at substation. But what we want to do, we are sitting at control center and wanted to understand what's happening. If I got 30 substation, I'm fetching data from all the substation through RTU. And I wanted to understand whether the data is malicious or not. So we are also interested in developing a global state estimation, right? So what we did, I'll just go in kind of brief detail. We think about power and communication topology. Right. So in this case, we created a network, communication network simulation part. So we use in Java. We did system label state estimation in MATLAB. And then we use power word simulator for power system dynamics. We have CPS a setup module, so you can start thinking what should be the setting of the simulator with respect to the realistic settings. So within your environment, you have devices. You can decide what is their baud rate, right? In terms of how fast the communication is, so on. How many devices are going? So you can represent the realistic, whatever is the realistic scenario. You can map this through some simulators. In a similar way, you decide that I got two routers, the way they are connected. You can fetch communication topology. Yeah. Pass this here. You can have your power system topology, pass it to this. And you can change it at any time, right? If you have change, you can update your topology and so on. We got attack modeler as well, where we believe there's an attacker who wants to play with this simulation tool, wanted to inject a variety of attack, and then we wanted to understand how this will impact the system. And then we also created CPS visualization for the operators. So you derive results, but those results may not be easy to interpret by these electrical operators. So we start visualizing them so that it becomes easier for them to understand. Right, and then we put some logic depending on what are the different cases we consider. We also develop certain matrices. For example, one is called component trust matrix. And then we wanted to understand if there are any physical attack, if there is any cyber attack. We want to trace it in a way, and which components being targeted in a way. So you got buses, generator, load transformer. We say physical, cyber, whatever. Total number of attack, successful, unsuccessful. What was the last time someone hit it, and so on. So you are kind of creating some matrices that can help you. When there's an attack, you can possibly utilize some of those matrices to derive some additional information. Then we have component criticality matrix, which will say which of these components are more critical in a way. Okay, we can repeat the whole exercise that we talk about how you identify critical assets, critical paths, and so on. But in this case, we just try understand if certain assets, certain systems have been constantly been targeted. Those are really critical. From topology point of view, the way they've been connected, the functionality of those assets. So you derive that matrix as well. Okay, so there are a few more things to understand. First of all, what is our aim? Our aim to develop a tool. When someone attack your system, we should be able to understand whether this is a normal scenario, this is an attack scenario. If this is an attack scenario, what is the impact of this attack? If it is a minor impact, possibly we can take certain action that can fix it easily. Right? So we need to understand this picture, for example, this one, which says this is the normal scenario, first one. The second one says seems to be a slightly issue, but still secure, no issues at all. Yeah? Little deviation, but all okay. The third thing says it's a securable. Seems to be some issues, but we put some actions, we can secure it. Next, it says it's completely insecure. Definitely need some actions, or might be reconfigure a system, or do some other things. And then last is it's really an emergency. Yeah, you're losing the control of the system. Someone is attacked, compromised several devices, and then you really need a team that can take quickly to take the control back. And then whatever is happening, possibly we kind of try to understand whether it's a cyber, due to cyber, or physical, and so on. Now this is how it looks like. Sitting at control center, from substation you're collecting data. Now we kind of model this. In a way, this could help operators. So the one you see these blue lines, the blue dots, right? These blue dots are communication. They are packets that are being sent from RTU to control center. If the size is larger, that means payload is large. The packet contains more bytes. If the size is small, so through that you also define it. If you restrict saying my packet should be of maximum of 1500 bytes, any packets containing more data could be bigger. If you like, you can also reflect this in different color, for example, a red or whatever. So operators can easily see that, oh, we need to look into this. This seems to me something malicious. So they are not cybersecurity experts, so they are not going to go and check the packet, but they will sit and say, okay, now the packet is coming. Now we are passing this information to the system. We need to observe what happens in one of these situations. Right? Might be they can notify security people saying this packet seems to be suspicious, check it. If there's enough time, they can check. They might discard the packet. If not, we still want to run it to see how it impacts the system. Now, when our intention is to utilize this kind of tool in real time, we also need to understand how this, because sometimes demand is different for every day, right? Demand peak on time, peak off time, and so on. So we also need to understand, let's say, what is the demand in next half an hour. If I'm running this, I also wanted to understand what is the demand will look like. If you're considering the demand is constant, something goes wrong, you start sending certain commands to balance it, right? Which is not correct. If in the next half an hour there will be an increase in the demand, suddenly you see there's a spike and you start thinking, oh, this is an attack, and you start like, however, this is not an attack. This is the projected requirement in next half an hour, right? So we also need to understand what is the And that's what we say future demand scenario, this one, yeah. Evaluate system behavior with future demands. So you need to understand what is the demand, what will be the demand in next half an hour. So you project that this will be the load, this is how the system will look like. And then you understand if that doesn't behave like this, what will happen. Yeah, what's happening, is there an attack, and so on. So in this case, let's say if we are saying 30 iterations. So let's say I come up with a tool that I can run every minute. I can in a way feed the expected demand for half an hour, run that environment. Yeah, and I'm saying my software runs every minute, so I can do 30 iterations, saying this is how it looks like. In the next half an hour, I can derive the results. This is how they look like. And as you go in real time, you can compare what you are getting with the one you have computed. If they are expected close enough, you're okay. If they're not, something's wrong. All right, so, okay. For a particular scenario, what we did is we run the simulation for 40 seconds with 8 time step, 8 iterations, considering the software ends for, one cycle ends for 5 seconds. Yeah. So you run 8 iterations of it. So we were deriving, as an outcome, we were deriving certain Excel files and some other things, and then plotting those results through some graphs so that electrical operators can actually understand. Oops. So this is how it looks like, the interface that we created. It's a simulation environment between control center and RTUs, which is substation and control center. What is the baud rate? What is the propagation delay within the network? Number of packets that we have sent, whether and what kind of packet it is. Is it a data? If it is a data, that's been sent from RTU to control center, right? If it is a command, being sent from control center to RTU to substation. What is the packet size at control center? What is the packet size expected at RTU? Then we created a tab called operation. So you can simulate normal operation. You can run this. This is normal scenario. These are my results for normal scenario. If you need to inject attack, you can pick single attack, and you can pick any of those attacks. So we simulated 4 different types of attack. I'll be talking about them. So you can say single attack, pick one of the attack, and you also decide what time it should jump in. So if I'm running a cycle of, I'm running 8 iterations, I will say after 3rd iteration, at 4th iteration, I'm injecting an attack. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so you have some understanding that first 3 iteration will be okay, but then starting at 4th iteration, we are expecting some deviation. So for example, we talk about bad command injection attack. We simulated bad data injection or false injection, whatever you call it. RTU DOS attack and delay attack. Delay attack is, for example, you're getting data, but data itself is delayed. Yeah, you consider topology, and you are, in a way, collecting some logs. Right? So in a normal scenario, control center sends command to all the substations. So I think in this case, we consider around 12 substations, if I remember correctly. So you are sending a poll request. So polling means you are requesting RTU to send the data, right? So everything is done in a command way. So control center sends a poll request, a poll command to all the RTUs at substation, and expecting them to send their data at this point of time. So what RTU will do? Through sensor, they will sense current measurements from the devices, send back to the RTU, and RTU send back to control center. Right, so you can kind of create a log in terms of control center, this port connected to this substation, this RTU particular, at this time. So you are kind of, what is the size and everything you can. And in a way, you can also derive how long it takes to send a packet or to receive a packet. Again, they are not constant. They are not always constant, but you can get a sense between this and this. It takes roughly 2 minutes, roughly 10 minutes. Yeah. And this is the normal scenario look like. I'll be talking about that in other slides. So we run the normal scenario, try and understand how the system should look like for the next half an hour, let's say. And then we start thinking, okay, what if we inject bad measurement, false data injection attack, where you fabricate data, pretending these are the current measurements, and then feed it, send it to the control center, considering, let's say, RTU is malicious, for example. Someone compromise RTU. So there are different ways you can think of. Someone can compromise your sensors, can modify data, send it back. Or if sensors are correct, someone can compromise RTU and modifying data at that point. So attacker manipulates raw measurements at RTU. In this case, that's what we thought. RTU sends bad measurements to control center. IDS and DSE provides an alert of suspicious data. May or may not, depends on what, how much you are changing in a way. Right? If you are changing a data, but data is within the threshold, might be your IDS won't pick up. If you are changing sudden change, maybe IDS can say, oh, this seems to be suspicious because we are not expecting that much payload, and so on. So as we has an attacker module, at this one we decided to pick an RTU between this and this. So what data you want to change? So we want to change, for example, either you can change the generation capacity. So you can reduce the capacity, you can increase the capacity, you can change in load. You can say in this region there's a more demand, so you can increase the load. You can open circuit breakers and things like that. So you can pick particular, in this case we are talking about data and false data injection, so we can kind of change magnitude of voltage, current, active, reactive power, and so on between whatever you like. So we want to kind of run some simulation environment, derive some results. For example, without bad data injection, with bad data detector. So as I said, state estimation by default has some capabilities to correct data up to a certain extent. Then we see normalized load profile and profile under attack. So the yellow line is kind of giving you what is the expected load profile in a normal scenario. But then when you're injecting data, maybe increasing the load or decreasing the load, it kind of behave differently. So through those kind of graphs and figures, you can derive your understanding whether the system will, what kind of impact it has on the system, and whether this seems to be stable or not. The second scenario, where we talk about malicious command injection. So again, we talk about 3 different cases. By assuming there's someone sends a malicious command to open or close circuit breakers. So attacker intercepts a legitimate command, alters it, so that could be the case. IDS identifies bad command based on its rule and notifies to the control center asking to confirm whether you are the one who sent it. Now this kind of tool can really help in those situations. When RTU receives a command and it's not sure, wanted to confirm whether the command is legitimate or malicious, and you don't really have time, because in few seconds, few minutes, you have to, as an operator, you have to make certain decision. And sometimes it's not easy to confirm whether the command is malicious or legitimate. So what we can do, we can pass this command. As I said, we have the exactly same environment. You have all the parameters that you have in physically. You can simulate. You can pass this to this software, and you have exactly the same environment. So you can decide on what if we allow this command. What will happen to the system? You run that simulation, see how it behaves, and then in real. So as I said, just run in 1 minute cycle. So in 1 minute, I can run the iteration, get to see how it will behave, And then you can decide whether you want to allow it or you don't want to allow it. Right? So in this case, what we did, so say IDA suspects a bad command. What do you want to do? Do you want to reject it or do you want to simulate it? I'll say, okay. If you are sure that this is legitimate command, no problem. If this is a suspicious command, you are sure, you want to reject it. Say, oh, this is not allowed anyway. We only use this command in emergency, for example. So you directly discard it. If you're not sure, you want to run this. Say, okay, let's simulate and see what will happen. So you pass this again. In this case, we have, let's say, change generator status. So we are opening a particular generator, right? And then running this command. Run this command, the whole process. And in this case, we are computing something called aggregate megawatt contingency overload. So there are some particular power system parameter that you compute, and those parameters will help you to understand whether things are stable or not stable, right? So you compute that parameter, run that algorithm, get a sense whether you want to finally reject. If you think that these values is way beyond threshold, definitely it seems to be suspicious, you want to reject it. Say, I have simulated, I don't want to run this command over the real system. So as an operator, you can discard this command. If you think it's very close to what you're expecting, it seems to be legitimate, okay, so you want to say allow it. When you do this, this will be run over the real system. It will open the generator, the circuit breaker for the generator. Right, we'll take 2 more minutes. Third scenario where we are talking about there's a delay measurement. So what we said, sitting at control center, you are fetching data from RTU and then passing it to SCADA system, running an algorithm. What if you're not receiving data from one of the substations? The data is delayed. You're getting, but maybe you're getting too late. You're getting data from all other RTU, but then there's one RTU not sending data in the time you're expecting. You can't really wait too long just to wait, but you just simulate and see what will happen. So what if the delayed measurements are delayed a bit, right? How they will look like. So you kind of start plotting things, do some experiment. When you say delay, how long the delay is. You know, if the delay is slightly, it might not impact. If delay is too much, it might impact. So if you don't feed the data, or if you are assuming that data is very close to the one you received in the past, so you're assuming that this time the data is kind of very similar, and run and simulate. But then when you got the actual data, you run again and see the difference. So this will also help you to understand what is the delay tolerance there, right? If you don't receive data, how long your system seems to be stable? Because we are relying on the previous historical data, the data that you already received in a way. And the last scenario where you assume disable RTU, you're not receiving any data, there's no delay, you're not getting any data at all from one of the RTUs or from number of RTUs, for example. So in that case, you don't have understanding, so you are losing the observability. You have no understanding what's happening at substation X because you're not getting any data, right? So we run those kind of things to understand what does the situation look like. Is it the emergency, the graph that we have seen? And then we put some other logics to try understand the observability from some other way through other substation and so on. Yeah, so for example, in this case, we lose the observability in this part, the brown one that you see in dark. And then we are trying to understand what is happening there because you're not getting any data from that. So for example, it's a legitimate versus malicious command to open generate number 36. So we open the last one. So the generator was closed and then we just open. So these are kind of logs and the outcome that we have created, stored into certain files and so on, and then plotting those for operators. These are the power system quantities. So like you got buses, you got generators, their capacity, transformers, and loads, and other things. We are also kind of keeping, as I said, log on communication side. How many routers you got, what time they are sending packet, what is the size of packet, and so on. And you derive certain matrices, system susceptibility, access point matters. You know, what kind of attacker made, what device they have access, which port number they have access, threat capability matrix. So you have security team that can detect some of the packets and so on. So this kind of, you are creating historical data for you to help understand which part of the system is critical, which devices are critical, you know, because they've been constantly been attempted by the attacker. And I guess this is the last slide before we go for break. Try understand, so when you run this malicious command, so in this case we run the malicious command after iteration 4 onwards. You see, so this is the load profile. So we say in the next half an hour, this will be the demand look like. It will go up in 10 minutes and then whatever. This is the normal scenario look like. And that this is the one when you perform an attack, detach a circuit breaker, you see the expected results slightly vary from that. Right? So this kind of, and these are the graphs possibly your system operator can look at. Because they're looking at the big screen, all kind of block, you know, and the kind of power system I shown you. So they're looking at all those things to understand what's going on. And at point when they think things are not correct, they want to investigate it. So we did this with the for the US Department of Energy. Let's have a 10 minutes break.